if a human being, for example, plots a murder and thinks about it very carefully and is kind of like doing it with very conscious intention, and then a lion kills a prey animal out of survival instinct, then which one is?
I mean, it can't just which one is worse. You've got to look at the conditions, the time, the environment, the person, the habit. There's so many factors that play a role. And one of the worst factors that plays a role that makes the karma the heaviest is the habit. So clearly lion, because they're habitually a killer. A mummy lion, it's her job to kill. She doesn't have a choice because the habit is so deep. That's much heavier karma. If a person, the same, a human being, if their habit is to kill. Many humans have a very strong habit to kill. So, but you can't, it's hard to, is one worse than another, but in general, the stronger the habit, the worse the karma. Because she has no, and because the ignorance is so much deeper. Ignorance is the ego. Okay, let's talk about the mind, and then we'll talk about the death process. It'll help. So the way the mind works, this is helping us get to see emptiness, actually, understanding emptiness, leading to this. That, okay, in this model of the mind in Buddhism, this mental consciousness, you've got this kind of this in the negative states of, oops, a daisy, more purification. Look at it. God help me. Can't believe. Flood is everywhere. More water on the floor, I'm sorry. Had to wipe it out. So you've got this hierarchy of delusions, basically. And the root delusion, they call it the root delusion, the main one, the mother of them all. The one that as long as that's there in your mind, you will never, ever, 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 ever stop suffering. You'll never, ever, ever, ever stop being reborn. But when that one's cut, and that one's cut first with your first non-conceptual, direct insight into emptiness, they're the words, and we'll unpack the meaning of this. Because that's the root delusion, okay? And this is called simply ignorance. It's obviously got a very specific definition here. All these words have very specific definitions. So, known in Tibetan as ma-ripa, unawareness. But it's this primordial, completely instinctive unawareness, very specifically, of how things exist, which means emptiness, reality, finally, ultimate reality is how they say. We'll talk about all this. So this ignorance completely does not know how things exist. But as His Holiness says, it's not mere ordinary ignorance. Ordinary ignorance is easy to fix. You know, if you say to me, what's that? And I just say, I don't know. Well, that's what we understand by ignorance. And that's easy to fix. You just tell me it's a cup. I'll go, oh, thank you. And I'll say, now it's a cup. Well, we could get enlightened in a couple of years if our ignorance was like that. It's easy. If there were just some big hole in there and you fill it up with the wisdom, then it's not difficult. But the trouble with this ignorance is, not only does it not know how reality is, it's believing totally, and has been since beginningless time, and frantically grasping at it like vampires at the exact opposite. So part of the suffering, and we can see this in our own minds, and all delusions are like this, they cling very strongly to their own point of view. You know yourself when you're really, really, like I'm jealous. So I'm jealous of Miko. I'm convinced Miko's looking at another girl. Jealousy is a tendency, let's say, in my mind. And he says to me, well, Robina, actually, I didn't do it, darling. You'd think I would go, oh, didn't you? Oh, what a relief. No way. You did, and you'll believe it as strong as possible, won't you? Because once you've got this view, it's instinct, it's the nature of all the delusions, is this frantic grasping. And the root delusion is the most grasping at all. And that's their nature. They cling to whatever the object or the story is. And this is why they're so painful to change. It's like trying to rip off your skin, isn't it? To change your story, to change the delusions, to change your belief system. It's a belief system, basically. And we're convinced of it. And so this root delusion, the one that underpins all the others in this hierarchy, so you'd say the main one so this ignorance, just speaking colloquially, it's clinging to, believing instinctively, primordially, in this really solid sense of a separate, lonely, bereft, independent I. This sense of a self out here and everyone else out there. Which seems so abstract to us because it appears like the world is that way. There are all these out there and there's me here. And so the way that this ignorance grasping, the technical words for it, its main job is delusion. It's a liar. It's believing in something that doesn't exist. All delusions believe in something that don't exist. What it grasps at is an inherent I, an I that's separate and independent of everything else. And we'll go into this. It's primordial, and it's known colloquially as ego grasping. It's very tasty. And so this runs the show. It's underpinning everything, and it's not necessarily manifest. But when you get attacked or insulted very strongly, then it's like a sleeping lion. It rises up in a state of panic, doesn't it? And literally, if you're on the road and someone kindly knocks you over, the heart beats fast, you completely panic. We call it in the West instinct for survival. I think that'd be a great way to say that's what ego grasping is. It's when your sense of self has been offended or attacked very strongly, this complete panic arises. So the interesting thing about all this ego grasping, its main energy is fear. Its nature is fear. So therefore, all the delusions that it gives rise to, and the main one, the main voice, if you like, of this ego grasping is this massive, primordial, bottomless pit of neediness, attachment to get what that fantasy I wants. So it's all these things we've made up, Buddha says. They're stories we have made up and believe in since beginningless time. Totally is the truth. So attachment is the main voice of this ego grasping. And its main job, even it's multifaceted, this attachment, multifaceted. So the deepest way of talking about it, as a result of the past lives of strong attachment, we're born with this instinctive, primordially intense sense of dissatisfaction. Never have enough. No matter what I get, it's not enough. No matter what I do, it's not enough. No matter what I have or see or do or say, it's never enough. It's this bottomless pit of dissatisfaction. And we have this in a really suffering way. Some people have it terribly suffering. So the grossest, obvious way that this attachment then functions, if you have a deep sense of dissatisfaction, its next level is then to grasp at something. Because if you're dissatisfied, you obviously are looking out there for something that you think will fill up the hole, isn't it? And the most obvious first level is the objects of the senses. This is the most gross level that attachment works at, isn't it? So it's to bodies or food or money or things, the senses, the objects of the senses. And we can see some are much more powerful than others. So depending on how deep this dissatisfaction is, and this is the nature of this attachment, and it's the main energy of this ego grasping, this sense of a self, then gives rise to this huge attachment. So you can easily see the one of alcoholism and being a drug addict or a sex addict or an addict to anything. Attachment's a mild word for addiction. In Western view, you're seriously mentally ill when you've got addiction. Well, Buddha says having any attachment at all, you're mentally ill. It's just a question of degree, that's all. It's a mental illness, basically. And Buddha would have liked that phrase, I'd say. So this attachment is running us every second. There's effectively in the Four Noble Truths and the Second Noble Truth and the causes of suffering, when it comes to the delusions, effectively this is the main cause of suffering in day-to-day life. Because also this body of ours is a body of attachment. Buddha calls this a realm, a desire realm. The word desire or the word attachment, they're synonymous, So this body we're living in, look at it. 5 senses, and the attachment that runs them, that has actually over eons of time karmically created us to have this body, the five holes that demand feeding, isn't it? And what is the world we occupy? The world that we occupy is the objects of these 5 senses that we run around craving and manipulating to look more delicious, We enhance them because we're clever. Dogs just go slurp, slurp on the ground. We have chefs and fancy plates and delicious gourmet food, because we've got intelligence that makes our attachment more exciting. With sex, dogs just go boom, boom, and they're finished. With all the drama, So you add intelligence to attachment, and you've got our world, isn't it? Anyway, ego grasping that gives rise to this primordial dissatisfaction, which is attachment. Then the energy of it is hankering, craving, and then then this is the thing about attachment. What it does is then this is the part that makes it so difficult. This attachment, being a delusion, all the delusions, all the neuroses, the negative states have this particular function, like I said, of being delusional. And the particular way that they're delusional is that the extent to which you have that delusion is the extent to which the object or the person or the event is exaggerated. So when it's attachment, what it does, attachment makes the object look more delicious than it really is. So the bigger the dissatisfaction, the bigger the craving. The bigger the craving, the more delicious the object looks. And therefore the more that you manipulate to get it. And therefore, of course, the more you expect to get it and expect the result that your fantasy projected. So it's all this layers of lies, layers and layers of lies, of delusions, of fantasies. And we've lived like this for eons, Buddha says, and this is what attachment does. And it's just massive, you know, and just to begin to unpack this is so huge, and it takes so long to get rid of it. Don't think, oh, just giving up chocolate cake, you're giving up attachment, forget it. So then, but the part that's about attachment, when it comes to chocolate cake, you know, chocolate cake doesn't mind if you stuff it in, you know, or even vomit it out. You're the one who suffers. But when it comes to human beings, that's a different discussion. Stuffing them in, then vomiting them out, which is what we do to each other, isn't it? You know? That's when it gets really difficult, because the attachment makes the person look more delicious than they really are. The neediness in you is so huge because you're so dissatisfied. You project all these needs onto that person. The person looks more divine than they really are, which causes you to, you're blind as a bat. You can't see any other qualities in them. You just see the dazzling, beautiful, gorgeous. And then you demand, because this is it's like a complete control freak. Attachment is control freak. It demands that person make me happy in the way that my attachment expects. And then you dare not do it. What do you think relationships, why they turn to be such misery, you know? I mean, it's like a nightmare. It's because of attachment. The more dissatisfied, the more you hanker. The more you hanker, the more you manipulate to get. The more the object looks more delicious, and then the expectation comes in. All of this are facets of attachment. And they're just running in us continuously, you know? We recognise, we see it. And then the attachment, this is the part that's so cruel too, attachment. Okay, this is where, when it comes to doing actions that harm others, that attachment is so shocking. So I always use this example of this little boy I mentioned before, the little boy, the son of a friend of mine who was a fisherman. She learned about, she came to me years ago in COURTIN. I heard this story, I've told it many, many, many times, because it's such a good example of how karma works. You're combining the delusions with karma and the imprints and how we're born, you know? This is really such a good example. So this little boy, she said her son, she came to me, she was crying. She'd heard Lama Zopa talk about karma. This is at COURTIN 20 plus years ago. And she said her boy, who's 29, he'd died 5 years before scuba diving. He'd spent his life being a professional fisherman. So she said herself she didn't like fishing, but she wanted to respect her son, so she never criticised him, you know. But she said since he was a little boy, the moment he saw fishing, he fell in love with fishing. This is what attachment is. And so basically this is how it works with karma. In his in this life, there he was. He's good, really good. Okay, the 4 ways of karma ripens. Remember? So let's tick them all off. He got a human birth, which means at the time of his past death, a human karmic seed, a virtuous karmic seed, was triggered, which programmed his mind, that caused him to go to running to this mummy's womb, and it was in California somewhere. So he got a really good rebirth, human birth. And then secondly, the experiences similar to the cause. He had really good karma with good mummy, good daddy, good siblings, you know, nice people. People saw him well. He was a good, you know, people liked him, treated him well. Really good experiences similar to the cause. He had really good tendencies. He was kind, intelligent, even very generous with his fish, you know. But he had one tendency to kill. And look at the human realm. Most humans kill something. Even most religions, as I mentioned, say it's okay. So it just shows the view is kind of interesting. It's a powerful tendency in our minds. So then when he was 29, he had a tendency to kill. And as soon as he met fishing, and this is how it is, this is the way karma works. He didn't think of it until he saw the fishing scenario, and that triggers the karmic imprint. So the way it works is they say that he must have been in the lower realms, which is the fully ripened result of killing in the past. So that he finished that karma. That karma ran out. Because karma's like petrol in the tank. It runs out. You use it up, it runs out. Then eventually it gave rise. He was in an appropriate condition at whichever life it was, and it has to have been from an animal life. He has to have then, a virtuous karmic seed was triggered, because we have thousands, billions of karmic seeds lugging around in our bank vaults of karmic seeds. If every microsecond of what we do, we're sowing seeds in the mind, and they don't go astray, you either pull them out or they ripen. So there's billions and trillions of karmic seeds in our bank vaults that haven't yet ripened. So at some point, after his main karma of being in the lower realms finished as a result of killing, he gets a human life again. Amazing. And so many other good karmic seeds ripen. Good life, good experiences, good tendencies, good environment, all these good karmic seeds from his own virtue. But he had the karmic seed to kill. And he also had the karmic seed of experience similar to the cause of killing, which is to either die young, get killed, or be sick, you know, and he got that. He died young, 29. Maybe he was killed by the fish as well. No, the point is this. One of the points. There he is, little boy, 5 years old, I don't know, sees fishing. And so instantly that environment triggers, like the memory. He doesn't know it's a memory, but it triggers the karmic seed. And immediately that triggers attachment. Simultaneously, it's happening all in a millisecond. It triggers attachment, massive attachment, because the habit is very strong in him. And this is the tragedy. That habit to keep killing is one of the residual results of the main karma. But because all the karmic results haven't been purified, then you're born in this life as a human, but you have a tendency to kill, and that's the worst one, because it ends up taking you straight back to the lower realms when you die. Plus, you had, in his case, the experience similar to the cause. So the other 3 ways that killing ripens, the tendency, the experience, you die young, in his case. The third one, environmental karma of killing, would be that the very physical world itself, the elements basically, would harm you. You know, you're allergic to peanuts. You live in a polluted environment. The food is really ugly. You get very sick. You have weak. This is an environmental result of killing. Or you live in an environment surrounded by people who die young, like in a war zone or something, you know. So in his case, he had these 2, the tendency and the experience. Didn't have the environmental one. So, okay. He's a human. He's got the tendency. He meets the scenario. It triggers the memory. The karmic seed ripens. It then triggers instantaneously very powerful attachment, because the stronger your connection with an event, an activity, a person, the more powerful is the attachment. You know, when you meet certain people, it's like Romeo and Juliet, you know. I just downloaded a while ago West Side Story again. I wanted to see Sondheim's, I love Sondheim's, you know, the modern dancing, and I like, anyway, I've got West Side Story. And so, you know, those Sharks and the Jets, when they're dancing that night, they'll go out to the party all dancing. There's Maria and Tony. Have you seen West Side Story? Okay. So suddenly, karma ripens. You know, even Tony knew something was coming. Like that song he sings, something's coming. Because you can feel the karma ripening, that's getting closer and closer to that karmic, that story, that connection between those 2 people ripening. Because karma's like that, you know. So they meet each other, and everything else disappears. They instantly, like recognition, fall in love. This is what it is with enemies. You're sitting there in the bar, you know, a friend of mine is sitting there in a bar, his son, and he meets a person who hates him, and he stabs him to death. That's karma ripening, you know. It wasn't good karma in that case. So, you know, he sees fishing, and it's like he fell in love with fishing, because the strong habit to kill. Instantly, and the stronger your habit to do something, this is a tragedy, the more delicious the object looks. This is why it's impossible to see for a person who's addicted to fishing, or addicted to raping, or addicted to terrorizing people. It's very hard to change. Look at apathetic habits. How hard it is to stop stuffing the food in our mouth. Because of habit, because of attachment, you know, and the karmic habit. So he had attachment to killing. And because it was fishing, which looks so benign in the world, and the world, in our world anyway, approves of fishing, so no one had to tell him not to do it. So, you know, imagine if he was attached to killing poodles. He'd have to sneak around at night doing it, wouldn't he? And he'd feel guilty, and no one would approve of him. He'd be having so much suffering. But he didn't have to have suffering when it comes to fish, because people approve of fishing. But also, look at the scenario. It is very beautiful. It is nice to go out in the ocean and out into the river. It is nature. It is quiet. The fish die quietly. Look at them. The poor things don't have legs. They can't leap over the boat. Like lobsters, you don't have to wrap their legs up. They don't, not like pigs, they don't squeal. You know, they don't squirt red blood everywhere. It'd be very uncomfortable to go fishing if they had loud noises and legs and blood. Who would enjoy fishing? So the whole scenario gives the illusion of peace for the humans. Well, I don't think it's for the fish. So meanwhile, there are these fish, right? And this is the thing, his mother, went fishing with him one time. She didn't like fishing. She didn't want to insult him, so she went with fishing with him. Because he totally adored it. This is the point about attachment. God, he was in love with fishing, which means when you're really attached to something, we all know this, you can't stop thinking about it. I mean, especially when we're in love, that's the one we have most. Or if you're in love with food. From the moment you wake up, think about it, not having it, what kind to have it, when to buy it, when not to have it, when to cook it, when not. I mean, look at us, you know. So imagine if you're attached to sex like that, these poor pedophiles, you've got to feel sorry for them. Or attached to torturing people. A strong habit from the past, you know, compelled to do it, thinking about it day and night. I mean, talk about mental illness. Well, he's attached to fishing. He defined himself as a fisherman. He called himself salmon. Because attachment romanticizes things. It makes it lovely-dovey, delicious wishes, you know. So he lived in his being a fisherman. He defined himself as a fisherman. It's like he took a vow to kill. He's a nice man. Don't say he's a monster. Tendency to kill makes it look delicious, and this is the point. His mother went fishing with him one time. So because she didn't have attachment to kill, she didn't have a tendency to kill, therefore didn't have attachment to fishing, she could see nakedly that the fish weren't happy. Anybody with half a brain can see the fish aren't happy, you know. But he could never see it. All he could see was his fantasy that his mind had created, the elaborate story his mind was making up every second, which is what we all do all the time. We're not seeing truth, we're seeing our story painted on top of the truth. As Lama Zopa says, that what the delusions do is decorate on top of what does exist, layers upon layers upon layers of characteristics that just don't exist there. And this is Buddha's point. And this is the job of the delusions. Each has their own job, you know. Each has their own style, their own way of projecting, their own way of lying. And the attachment looks benign. This is the trouble. Looks benign. But because he couldn't see, all he could see his story, he could never see the suffering of those sentient beings. Even, you know, I remember watching on the television those baby seal killers, you know, the ones who bash the baby seals to death. So I remember this fellow being interviewed, and he was really offended by all these fanatic animal rights people. He said, they don't understand, this is what my father taught me, this is our culture, this is what we do. Meaning, because of the karmic imprint to kill, and in his case quite aggressively, he was born in a culture that did this, you know. So even though this baby seal, obviously not happy, indeed squealing, squirting blood, he couldn't see suffering. This is the tragedy of attachment, you know. When we're in love with somebody, all you can see is their divine parts. Then all this expectation, this neediness, this grasping, and then they dare to be a normal human being. And then you blame them and sue them later. Well, don't blame them. They were like that all the time. You just couldn't see it. But we love to blame the other person because they didn't fulfill my fantasy, you know. Attachment's really fierce, really manipulative, controlling, neurotic, like a vampire, needy, frantic. But who would have thought this? You know, attachment's our best friend. We live in it. It runs our lives, you know. But quiet levels, unless we're a junkie. That's why we don't notice it. But this is the point. The millisecond it doesn't get what it wants, its main energy is to get what that I wants every second. That's one way of saying the main energy of attachment. It is to get what this I wants every single second. Desperate, frantic. And the millisecond it doesn't get it, that's anger. The bare bones state of mind, actually, beneath what's called anger, is aversion. They've got attachment and aversion. So attachment is the one that over-exaggerates the deliciousness of something and makes you want to go towards it. And then aversion is over-exaggerating the ugliness of something and makes you want to go away from it, repels, you know. These are instantaneous, primordial states of mind. And the way aversion manifests when attachment doesn't get what it wants, which is 1,000 times a day, little baby versions of it, which we don't notice until they're really big. You know, it's either called anger, which is the usual one we think of, volatile hitting out, or it's depression. It goes in, but it's more subtle because you can't see it. So every time our attachment doesn't get what it wants, and it's default mode, this attachment, it's not conscious. It's instinctive. It's the interesting thing about all the delusions, as I said about ego grasping, the main delusion, its main energy is fear, but therefore all the other delusions, which are the branches of it, the voices of it, attachment, aversion, and then jealousy and all the other dramas, they all come from this ego grasping, and they're all in the nature of fear. This is what interesting. If you look in Buddhist psychology, you look at the list of the states of mind, you will not find one called fear, because the delusions are all in the nature of fear. They're in the nature of fear. Their flavour is fear. And that's why Lama Zopa says, when you realise emptiness, there is no fear. This is hard to conceive of, hard to visual. In the West, impossible to imagine. There's no concept psychologically like this, you know. But this is the Buddha's view, which is amazing. So as you get more and more less grasping, less attached, less angry, less jealous, less stressed, you become more blissful, more content, and more fearless, naturally. It's just a natural state that arises using this method, This is why it's in the nature of suffering. These delusions are in the nature of suffering because they're in the nature of fear, because they're clinging to things that don't exist. As Lama Yeshe says, Miller Ape is up in the mountain laughing because he's seen the truth. So karma, I was just with the fisherman. It's the one of the habits from the past programming the mind, and then add attachment to it, and there's the recipe for disaster. And this is why to change our minds is so painful. But I keep saying, look at our mild habits. Running to unhappiness, running to depression, running to jealousy, running to low self-esteem, running to stuff the food in the mouth, all the fantasies, all the neediness, the mind running rampant. Our suffering is so mild in comparison with if you were a junkie, were a sex fiend, were a terrorist, were a pedophile, those level of habits, not to mention a fisherman. But look how hard it is to change the mind. Which is why we should be so humble with ourselves to know it is possible. It's logically possible, but it's not that easy. So then we have more respect for ourselves instead of beat ourselves up all the time, which just causes more trouble, And that's the irony of dissatisfaction. No matter how hard we try to practice, we keep being dissatisfied. I should be doing more. You get to grade 2, I should be in grade 3. You get to grade 49, I should be in grade 50. We're never happy. So we've got to practice being satisfied, as Lama Yeshe puts it. You've got to train your mind to think, I'm doing well. It is okay. I'm doing well. You've got to practice it. Because the logic of attachment, which is not logical at all, is that when I get that, then I'll get happy. So now we think, well, before it was when I get a fridge, I'll get happy. When I get a boyfriend, I'll get happy. And now we think, well, when I get rid of anger, I'll get happy. No, you can't think this way. You've got to start being happy now with what you've got so far. And you've got to train your mind to think this, to go against that instinctive dualistic view of when I get this, then I'll get happy. When I practice more, I'll get happy. When I have concentration, I'll get happy. No, you'll never be happy. You've got to train the mind to be content now with the status quo, and that gives you the courage then to keep moving. And you've got to think that through. You've got to train our mind to think differently. It won't come naturally, So attachment, it's very intense. Every second, every millisecond is running the show. Its energy is dissatisfaction, hankering, exaggerating, expecting, manipulating and then expecting, all of this. And then inevitably and inexorably, it leads to, and this is the second kind of suffering, it leads only to dissatisfaction. And we have to look at the logic of why. Because attachment is a liar, what it thinks it will get isn't what it gets. It's a liar. It's not seeing truth, It's not seeing truth. Because in other words, attachment is this over-exaggerated, distorted view of that delicious thing and what it will do for me, and when I get it, I'll get happy. But the tragedy with attachment, and we can see it immediately with something as simple as a chocolate cake, all this fantasy is there, all this neediness, all this expectation, all this anticipation, also spontaneous. And you can't wait to get the cake in the mouth. And even as you're eating that first mouthful, already you're anticipating the second mouthful. Already. I remember hearing about one guy who was addicted to sex. He said as he was on one girl, already he's anticipating the next girl. This is how attachment works. The more it is, you see a 3-year-old child with the cake. She's putting one mouthful in and then the other one in the other hand. She can't get enough in because that's the way attachment is. So as you're eating the cake, of course we behave more nicely now. We're not like little girls stuffing it in. But already the mind is berserk. Can't wait for the next mouthful. Can't even enjoy this mouthful because anticipating the next one. And then you anticipate the next one. And then what the tragedy is that the suffering starts to come, and we know it, if we're becoming even a little bit aware. Your stomach isn't full yet. So you keep happily having more cake, but the real one that's happening is you're not satisfied yet. That's not your stomach, that's your mind. So the stomach gets fuller, and at some point, and it's quite distressing because you're not satisfied yet. Because you're believing having the cake will bring satisfaction. But it's impossible, Buddha says. It's not the job of cake to make you satisfied. It's like not the job of heroin to satisfy you. Heroin or cake, what's the difference? It's a question of degree. So the more we know, so the suffering of attachment is not only Not only does the cake not bring satisfaction, it brings a stuffed stomach, and if you ate another mouthful, you would vomit. We know that. Not only does it not bring what attachment thinks, which is contentment, satisfaction, it brings more craving tomorrow for more of it. And that's the suffering of attachment. As my mother used to say, the more you get, the more you want. This is the suffering of attachment. We know it, but because we're so addicted to it, and because we don't know any other method, then we can't bear to see it. We just can't bear. It's too painful. When we're junkies, it's too painful to see it. It's too terrifying. And this is the point about fear. It's too terrifying to consider not having it, because we're addicted to it. This is why practice is hard, you know. So when we understand how primordial it is and how pervasive and how deep, we will have the humility to realize that it's not that easy and it won't go overnight, and so we're prepared to work with it. Almost as if, I like to think of all my roommates. I said before, it's my analogy. I use all my roommates, all my thousands of states of mind, basically. The endless thoughts in Robina's head, So we can see the negative ones. They're running rampant, running the show, all based upon this little I, the fantasy. I this, I that. If it's very lot of proud thoughts, it's offended when people insult you. If it's angry thoughts, it's always dissatisfied. If it's jealous thoughts, you're resentful someone else has got something and you haven't. They've all got their own story, And that's why we have to listen to the story, hear the story of every one of these thoughts. They've all got their own unique little way of talking. And there are all these thousands of them, all talking away, all running, they're running the household right now. So the virtuous ones are there, the opposite states of mind, the rejoicing, the patience, they're all there. We've got them. But they don't get exercise enough because we just buy into the bad roommates are the bosses, So the little good roommates, the patience and the wisdom and the compassion and the kindness and the forgiveness and the self-respect, they're kind of in the cupboards under the bed, not coming out. Because we don't give them a go, We're addicted, we run to the bad ones. So then they run the show, and then we start to see them more, and we start to see our minds. They say when you study the 9 stages of single-pointed concentration, you learn to do that and you study the teachings on it. They say one of the first signs of success in learning to meditate is you think you're getting worse. Well, you're not getting worse. You're just noticing these roommates that have been running the show you've been unaware of, because you thought it was everybody else's fault. And now you start to notice your own mind. It's kind of scary as hell. So we're not getting worse. That's why we have to have courage, Because the irony of attachment is, like I said before, we're going to be attached to the cake or the boy or the fridge. Now we're attached to feeling better. We're attached to doing a better practice. So you're not going to get happy when you do more practice. You're going to have to train your mind. So that means one of the processes we have to go through is, if it is true the delusions in my mind are why I suffer, and if it is true that I'm sick of suffering, then I have to recognize the delusions. Like if you've got some cancerous growth, you can't live in denial of it. You can't wish it would go away. You can't pretend it's not there. You have to open it up nakedly and look at it and observe it and understand its character so you know how to deal with it. So you have to face our delusions. But because we know they're not at the core of our being, we have to have confidence in that. Then we've got the courage to hear all the stories and be glad when we hear another level of this disgusting attachment popping its head up, So it's like you learn to make friends with these roommates. I'm not kidding. Like if you were living in a house full of ugly people, you can't stand them, they shout, they yell, they're rude, you wish they'd go away. So instead, you can't make them go away. So you've got to learn to make friends with them. Open the door, let them come, hearing what their stories are, welcoming them. Not because you want to defend their right to be who they are, because they're the cause of your suffering. But it's like bad enough you've got aversion roommates and jealousy roommates and attachment roommates, but then as soon as you meet them, oh my God, I'm so attached, then you start getting angry with your attachment. Then you get angry that you're still angry. Then you get angry about the jealousy. So you're kind of adding more roommates. It's like never ending. So you've got to stop being angry with being angry. You've got to be glad you're seeing anger. You've got to be glad you're hearing jealousy rearing its head. The virtue has to come out and be rejoicing that now you're seeing the shitty anger and now you know what the enemy looks like, and so you can work with it. And then because you then are welcoming these parts of your mind, but you're disciplined, you don't let them run the show, then they start to calm down because your virtues become stronger. I mean, it's just a way of talking. This is my way of talking. You understand? Are you making sense, people? But it's hard work. This is hard work, you know. Because everything in us wants to live in denial or blame everybody else or feel guilty. We swim in it. We drown in our misery thinking it's being virtuous, you know, constantly putting ourselves down. But seeing your faults and beating yourself up for them are very separate, very different things, you know. Yeah. So the way we're talking here is, we know the words anger, attachment, jealousy. These are ancient. But Buddha's take on them is so specific. That's why it's deceptive. By hearing the words, we think we understand what it means. But Buddha's view of it is so distinct. It's so precise how he talks. And more than anything, that they're all conceptual stories. They are what inform the emotion, you know. And secondly, we're not discussing here anything out there that causes them. That's not the business here. We're looking at the anger itself, the jealousy itself, the attachment itself, not the object that triggers it, which is what we're usually obsessed with. And it's very hard to do this because, you know, if I'm mad at Mikko, you say, Robina, what's going on? And I'll say, Mikko did this and he did that and he said this and he said this. And you know, and I'm angry. Tell me about your anger, Robina. And I repeat what Mikko did. You talked about Mikko, Robina, now talk about your anger. I'll go, huh? I just did. But I didn't. I talked about him. So all the delusions have their object. So when there's anger in the mind, this one particular thing, anger is its own thing, its own story, it's got its own elaboration, its own way of thinking, its own story, but it's got an object and it's called Mikko. And all we think about is the object. We don't even know how to look at the anger. We don't even know how to listen to its story. We can't separate it from the object. That's why it's so hard, you know. And of course in our materialist culture, we look at what Mikko did to me and Mummy did and Daddy did and they did and he did. That's helpful, but then, you know, if I've got anger, I'm always going to meet people who will make me angry. I can't blame the people. I have to look at the anger itself, and that's what's hard. It takes a while even to hear this. And that means not just the feeling, I'm angry. No, that's not looking at anger. Basically, if you've got this, like I said, this is like a hierarchy of these delusions, you know. And the ego grasping is the root one. It underpins everything. It's they're all assumptions. This is the deepest assumption, and it's the assumption of an independent I, which of course is so subtle for us. On this basis is the attachment to get what it wants. On the basis of attachment not getting what it wants, there's anger. On the basis of this is jealousy and the others. So the more we understand they're all conceptual stories and their assumptions, then you start to unpack each assumption, which leads down lower, deeper. You unpack the layers like an onion. It is highly conceptual, but crucial to do. And because they are all concepts, we can change them. Thoughts are not set in stone. This is Buddha's view, you know, this is Buddha's point. There's no thought we can't change, because everything comes down to being a thought, even though they're deeply instinctive and eons old. Even the ego grasping, so primordial, is a series of conceptual stories about there being a definite, pointable, findable, independent, inherent me that does exist in there, separate from everything else. That's the words for how this ego grasping functions. But who would ever have thought that? So I have to learn the words, you know. Am I making sense?
Yes.
So let's look at this ego grasping then. The deepest one of all, on this business of emptiness. Excuse me.
But can I ask you
Mm.
that
Mm.
I suddenly felt myself offended, it was about a discussion, and then I noticed that I was excluded
And notice you what?
excluded from the discussion.
Oh, okay, good, yes.
And then I noticed that I was offended.
Yes.
Then I switched and I thought that why did they exclude me?
Uh-huh.
And I was thinking. And then I think that they were a little bit afraid because they didn't know about the subject. And then I knew more about the subject. So they excluded me. So I
And how did that help you?
No,
Was
it
it-
did not. Yes, it did help me because I calmed down and I just stayed excluded. And
Okay.
I was then thinking that I don't.
But that's one way of talking, but maybe to look at,
I was thinking.
but that's good, it's one way, but then maybe there's still, you see something in that, let's just analyse it, now you brought it up, it's helpful.
Yes.
Let's just look at, but no, what I'm getting at, that is one interesting approach, but if we unpack that a little bit more deeply,
Yes.
the better thing to look at
Yes.
is why in the first place there would even arise the thought that I have been excluded. There's an assumption in that you shouldn't have been excluded, and that's called attachment. One of the deeper,
Yeah.
huh?
Sorry. Yes. No, I was watching why I was offended, and then I noticed that.
I know that, but please hear me.
Yeah.
Let's unpack it in a different way, shall we?
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's look at being offended, what that is. Okay. Because even your answer for yourself for why you were feeling, why they excluded you, was still putting it on the outside. Because they thought this. So let's look at what I'm trying to say is, what we have to do is look at the thing that first arose in your mind. She doesn't need defending. Let her be.
She's my very dear friend.
I know, but she doesn't need defending. She's a big girl. She brought it up.
I can still hold her.
You can hold her. We're so kind to each other, I know. It's so sweet. Okay. You're the one who's very brave bringing it up. Would you like to discuss it as a good example
Yes,
for all of
because
us?
because then I wasn't offended anymore.
I know that, but
And
would you
I
like to
was
go
quite-
further, I'm asking you? You keep repeating your story. Would you like me to use you as an example,
Yes.
being offended, and look at it more deeply? Would you like to do
Yes,
that?
I would like to.
You would like to do that? Okay, good. Let's do it. Because we all recognize what you're saying.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying to you is this. I'm suggesting that your reasoning for why they excluded you, you gave a reasoning, didn't you, which worked for your mind, yes?
Yes.
Okay, what I'm suggesting is that's good, but it's not the best, because you are still putting an absolute truth on it, that they did do something to you. You're assuming that's true still, aren't you? Can you hear that point?
Yes. Yes.
So that's still putting it on the outside, isn't
Yes,
it?
that's
So let's go back to your mind. And we all know about being excluded, so it's not being
Yes.
personal, is
No,
it?
no,
So
it's
let's
not
analyse
personal. Yes.
that as an assumption. So
Yes.
if there's an assumption I should be included in something, no, the assumption I wasn't included, the thought, oh, they're not including me, that comes from an assumption that I should be included.
Yes.
And that is attachment. And this is the deepest attachment we all have. The grossest level of attachment in the first stages of understanding the practice is attachment to the sense objects. That's fairly easy to see. The chocolate cake, the body, the clothing, the food. You understand my point?
Yes.
But this deeper level attachment, much more subtle, very hard to see, is attachment to being seen and heard by other people. They call it attachment to reputation, which sounds very kind of abstract, but it's this huge neediness in us all the time to be seen by others. And as soon as we're not seen, do you understand? That's why the pain of feeling rejected. Some of us have it much more strongly than others. But do you understand what I'm saying? And this is a very deep one for all of us. And it's based upon an assumption that I'm not valued if someone else doesn't smile at me. I'm not valued if they don't talk to me. This is how deep our attachment is. This is the pain of so much of our suffering. And it's even the basis of why we even want relationships. Because it's almost as if the assumption of attachment, the irony of the assumption of attachment is I am nothing unless I'm seen by others. That's why we're lonely. I'm sitting in my house, and immediately when I say I'm lonely, I'm having thoughts. And then I've got no one to share my thoughts with. That's what we mean by loneliness, right? But where is the logic that says that my thoughts aren't valuable until you hear them? It's very bizarre, you know. So when we fall in love with each other, and I'm full of neediness and low self-esteem, and then you're full of neediness and low self-esteem, and then we prop each other up in this really artificial relationship, and then I'm craving from you for you to approve me, and you're craving from me to approve of you. I mean, no wonder we have serious problems. Do you understand what I'm saying? That I get upset when you don't see me, and then you get upset when I don't see you. We never hear each other. We go mad, you know. Look at our relationships. This is not attachment to sex, believe me. That's just temporary. It's attachment to being seen and heard by each other. It's so primordial. And it's normal behavior. Even the view of what a person is in our culture is this person, a social being who needs others to exist. Well, Buddha says that's the deepest mental illness of strong neediness and attachment. And everyone's got it. It's very typical. Are you hearing me? It's quite hard to get beyond that assumption, though.
Yeah.
Can you hear it a little bit?
Yes, I understand it. Yeah.
Good.
But I was. Yeah. Okay.
But
So
you want to
this
keep going back to your thing,
assumption,
though.
helped me to keep
No, I know, but how do you know it was right? Maybe they didn't even notice you. No, listen to me.
Okay. Yes.
You're being very stubborn now. You listen to me. I'm the boss here today.
Okay.
It made you feel better, but that was may I suggest it was an arrogant thought.
Okay.
I mean, I'm being very personal with you.
Yes.
Because listen, darling, they mightn't even have noticed you.
Yes, that could be.
Come on, so don't put it on the outside. And it's a nice story that made you feel better, but maybe it's got no basis in truth. And the point I'm getting at is this. The being your own therapist that we're discussing here is the method I was using. Nothing to do with what the people did. See, they might, listen, now put it this way.
Yes.
Maybe they did consciously not like you. Maybe they consciously thought, we're not going to get that snooty girl in our group. Maybe they consciously rejected you. That could even be true, but that still isn't the point. That's my point. The point is why in your mind you have the, not being personal with you now, I'm talking about all of us, why we would have the need to be seen by those people. That's the point I'm talking about. Listen, people do bad things to us every day. People do punch us in the nose. Miko will cheat on me. So that's not the issue. You see my point? It's not as if, that's not the point here for the Buddha. The point is, and this one sounds shocking, the normal world will say, I'm allowed to be angry if he cheats on me. But the Buddha would say, ROBINA, just because Miko cheats on you is no reason to be angry. That's a bit shocking for us, but that's what he's saying. Because he says, ROBINA, I've got a choice. I don't need to be angry. I can decide, like that woman in prison, not to be upset, but to change my mind. That's what's most powerful. So it might be true the people did reject you. It might be true, but that's not the point. Can you hear what I'm saying? This is very intensely personal. Looking at our own mind and owning whatever that might be. They've got another discussion is what they did. That's another discussion. Put it that way.
Yes.
You see my point? This is very fierce, separating the object from ourself.
Yes.
In other words, the wisdom wing work is every second seeing what is arising in my mind,
Yes.
labeling it correctly, and owning it for mine. Then if I want to discuss those people, that's another discussion. Put it that way. You see my point?
Yes. So you can't get it from outside because then it's your.
Can't get
your
what from
assumption.
outside? Can't get what, darling? What are you talking about? Okay,
Well,
stop.
this was a
Did you hear what...
really a small one. I was not offended that much.
It's
but
not the
I just-
point.
it was
That's not the
something
discussion here.
that-
Tell me what you think I've just said.
No,
Summarize what I just said.
I somehow-
Summarize what I just said.
Yes, I know.
What's your name? I've got to shout at you because you're not hearing me. What's your name?
Anne Ivars.
Who?
Anne?
Anne.
Yes, Ivars.
Anne Ivars.
Yes.
Anne Ivars, give me a summary of what I've said in the last minute.
Said.
What have you heard me tell you?
Yes, that if I'm got offended, I should not put it on them.
I said that 3 minutes ago. What about the last minute? What was the main point I said the last minute? The main point I said. You get it? What did you hear, sweetheart?
I think it was that no, for me maybe I can't, I just remember this that you said.
Okay.
That I feel that is.
Fair enough. Good.
Interesting here. That is like that if I do that, it's just an assumption, and also it doesn't have to do that. It doesn't have to do anything with the Buddha view. You could say that.
Which view?
With the Buddha view.
No, with your mind. I forget the Buddha view. I don't care what Buddha says. I'm talking Buddha's view, but that's not the
Yes.
point. I'm saying what goes on in our mind is
Yes.
one thing.
Yes.
What people do is another thing.
Yes. that
We
was-
connect them too strongly.
Yes.
What I'm trying to say is, so every second, whatever happens out there in the world, our job in this wisdom wing is to be conscious of what is arising in my mind and
Yes.
label it accurately and work with it. That's the real job of being your own therapist. And that's a tough job.
Yes.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, of course.
Anyone else want to be shouted at? But it is intense, isn't it? It's really quite a subtle point. Because you see, we are so addicted. This is the point. This is the dualistic ego works. And that's what the view is reinforced in our culture. Like with children, it's very interesting these days, my own experience over the years, it seems more and more young Western children are being recognized as reincarnated yogis, meditators, lamas from past lives. Okay? So many of them, more and more. And when you get to see them, I've seen many Tibetans and then many young Western ones, you get to see they're really quite unusual people. They're what the world often calls autistic. Two I can think of have been called autistic, and they're reincarnated yogis. So let me explain. So I'm not talking about serious, deeply serious mentally ill children. I'm talking about people who've got super intelligent mind, fearless behavior. You understand what I'm saying? Very fixated on certain things because their minds are so much into detail. That's exactly the quality of a very powerful yogi's mind. But when you're a little body, it's very uncontrolled, right? So the usual view of a child, a person in our culture, is that we're social beings, which means we exist in relation to each other. We consider it mentally ill to think that you're a person in and of yourself almost. So children, a typical child, two little children all needy for attention, come along and give each other toys and they fight and they hug and kiss and make up, That's called a normal child behaviour. Well, one of these children, like this kid I can think of now, little boy, fierce little boy, who has no interest in food, intelligent like you can't imagine, typical brilliant intelligent mind, super fixated on details because the intelligent mind goes very deep into detail, big overview, fearless about what people think of him. I mean, his mother sent him to school for the first time when he was 4. He's been reading and doing languages since he's 2 and that kind of thing, And he was like outrageous behaviour. The poor school, there was one of those schools called that kind. They couldn't cope with him. He was completely outrageous behaviour, outrageous behaviour. But there's something clear and sharp and incredible about him, Anyway, the point is, I remember his mother really, in the beginning, really worried about him because they called him autistic and all this stuff. So I remember I said, because she's a student of Lama Zopa, and I said, well, first write to Lama Zopa, get advice, but also there's this Tibetan doctor I know, and many of these great Tibetan doctors, they're virtually lamas, they're realised beings, They just have to look at a person because they know the body so well. They can see the mind because the Tibetan medical system is based upon the view of the mind and based on karma. So I just sent a photo. She sent a photo of this boy to this lama and a few of his symptoms. He said, of course, that's how yogis behave, he said. Right like that, Gave him medicine. And the Lama Zopa gave him all his practice. He's like 4, memorised the Heart Sutra. He does all these things. He's extraordinary, Remarkable child. Outrageous behaviour. You wouldn't want to be a mother. You'd go mad, But phenomenal being. You can see it. So really the way we tend to think of what's normal in this world is really quite shocking, Shocking. Because, you understand?
Yes, because I just say yes because I have been working with autistic
there you go.
Children, and I have came to this
yes.
that they say that they are out of everything, and I say that I'm out of everything.
There you go.
By
That's right.
working with them and seeing
That's
what
right.
ability and what calmness and in what levels they are living.
That's right. And yes,
Yeah,
perfect.
great to
Well
hear
done. Well done.
from
Donna. That's
somebody
my
else
opinion.
also.
That's
Yes.
my opinion,
Yes.
Yeah. And also myself being kind of a berserk person too, Recognising, Anyway. So this one, okay, we're going to talk about emptiness. All right, let's get to the deepest one of understanding the misconception of the very root delusion itself, the assumption of an independent I, which gives rise to the assumption that I ought to get what I want. And then the assumption that how dare you do that when I don't get what I want. These are the things, use the word assumption, it's a very good one. Anger is an assumption. Anger says, how dare you say that? Well, excuse me, where's the view that you shouldn't say that? What is the assumption in my mind? But because we believe in these views so strongly, we get offended and upset and all this business that we have in our lives, So to question them as an assumption is a shocking concept because our materialist view doesn't. We take them as real and normal. I mean, even just recently, I remember very briefly reading a book, but just looking at it quickly. It was a report from this Austrian girl years ago. I can't think of her name and how long ago it was, I don't remember. Who was kidnapped and imprisoned for many years by this fellow in Vienna somewhere. I can't remember where, somewhere in Austria. 8 years, something like that. From the time she was 8 till she was 16, then she escaped. And I think he didn't sexually abuse her, but he kind of beat her up and abused her and kept her prisoner and he wanted to be her master, this kind of thing. But what was fascinating about this woman, and she was 8, He was the only person in her life for 8 years. Can you think, in those during formative years of growing up? Which for me, the way she responded is also reiterating that she had certain qualities in her mind that doesn't come from parenting, you know? They were her own tendencies. So the way she talked about this experience, how she finally had the courage to leave him, and then the way she didn't just blanketly hate him and blame him. Because she knew this man intimately for 8 years, but she had this ability not to be totally fixed in her view. And she said it's more nuanced than that. And she said many of the people who wanted to support her were angry with her that she didn't want to blame him, thinking that she was deluded, you know. But she said it's more nuanced than that. And so she said many of these people rejected her, because if you look at the deluded mind, we want to find innocent victims who are totally perfect innocent victims and complete 100% monsters. We want the two extremes, you know. But she had this ability to see, and she was very powerful in her own mind. She made her own decisions. When she got out, she didn't have to have much counselling, and nobody accepts that, because she has her own ability to work with her own mind. She's not full of hate and rage, and she's not having mental illness, because she's able to work on her own mind, because she didn't have much anger, didn't have so much attachment, learn from this experience. This is a possibility with Buddha's view, but not in the Western view. People mistrust that, you know. You understanding what I'm saying? So anyway, let's look at the deepest one, the ego-grasping one, how it functions. It's much harder to see this one. And how it isn't true, how it's an exaggeration, how, like all of these delusions, it is a distortion of the truth, okay? So the problem is with this attachment, this emptiness business, is the words are used in this particular way, coming back from thousands of years, you know, this particular way of talking. And because in the lineages, this oral lineage passed on from one being to the next, there's this enormous respect paid to the way the words are used, you know. I mean, Lama Zopa painfully, accurately translates the words. For example, like the Lamrim, the teachings according to the lowest capability. So he could easily say junior school, but he doesn't. He puts it the way his Lama got it. And his Lama got it from his Lama. And he tracked it back to Atisha in the 11th century. And they track it right back to Mr. Buddha, you know, or whatever the words are. There's this enormous respect to the lineage and the way the words are used, which is why the tradition is kept so alive and perfect, you know. So this is marvellous. But I think also there's nothing wrong with unpacking it and speaking it in different concepts, especially for us coming from a completely different culture, talking in very different ways, framing and structuring things so differently. And then add to that the way we reify religion. Then until we get past the concepts and unpack them in our own words, we will just leave them in the sky and mystify them. So people who are Buddhists have been saying, oh, I've been listening to Emptiness for 30 years and I don't understand it. Much of the problem is because we're just putting the words in the sky and don't even know how they're used properly. It's a major problem, you know, in my opinion. So let's look at the use of these words. Let's try and unpack the words simply. Even just the word emptiness is a major problem for us. Well, first of all, the word emptiness, really simply, empty. It means not. It means absent. It means not there. If we say this room is empty, we know it means there are no people in it. This is language we use. If I say my cup is empty, we know it means there's no drink in it. So it's a simple word. Something doesn't have something, you know. The bank is empty of dollars. You know, we mightn't say that word, empty. So that's the meaning of the simple word empty. So the use of it here is so specific. That's one point. It just means not. So let's just use a couple of examples and then I'll try and explain the way they use the word. And it's really got meaning when you understand it. So, always the same example I use. Let's say you look at this cup. And we can see, isn't it, that this cup has got mainly red. Yeah, we all agree this colour's red, don't we? This main colour's red, yeah? So if one of you in this room is colourblind, you wouldn't see red. You'd see, say, blue, let's say, wouldn't you? That'd be right. Isn't it true? If you're colourblind. Huh. What?
Green. You would see green.
Or would you? I don't know. I'm just making something up. Okay, you'd see green. Okay, good. Okay, thank you. So let's say you're colourblind. You see green. Now okay. So first of all, so what's your name?
Annina.
Huh?
Annina. Annina.
Anila.
Annina.
Annina. Oh, sorry, you people. I can't hear the Finnish words. Annina.
Yes.
I forget. Anina. Okay, Anina. So listen, darling, Anina's colourblind, okay? So she sees green. So first of all, we could ask, well, why can't she see green? She's allowed to. It's true. But she won't communicate with anybody. If she says pass the green cup and I say I don't have one, she'll accuse me of lying, won't she? So we'll have a fight. So this is where we have to first establish, this is a really crucial point. We have to first establish, Buddha says, conventionally what is true and what is not. Conventionally. So we can all communicate. So Buddha talks about the two truths. And a really good way to frame this discussion about reality is in the context of the two truths. So the two truths are conventional truth and then there's ultimate truth, okay? So the shorthand for conventional truth is the term dependent arising, that things exist or things are established in dependence upon various factors. So the Buddha's remember the Buddha's saying we're not seeing things correctly. He's saying that. We're seeing everything through the filter of these different delusions, which causes us suffering. That's the point. You know, seeing things not correctly and merely not passing your exam, who cares? The reason that he wants us to see things as they are is because that's the method to stop suffering. It's got a real point to it. Okay, so, but in order to discover how things exist, he says, ultimately, which is emptiness, we've got to first establish how things exist conventionally, and then we can discuss everything. So what we have to do then is first establish the conventions in the universe. So if we think of the universe, there are trillions of individual different set of phenomena, aren't there? There's cups and toilets and microphones and red paint and dragons and carpets and books. There's a billion things. So you first have to establish something. Then we can begin to discuss it. So, okay. Anina. Okay. Everybody in the room will say that's red. And then Anina says, no, she sees green. So let's first establish what is red. We have to agree, the word red, then we have to agree upon what red is. We have to define red. So there has to be a convention that the world will accept as red. We first establish the name, then we define it, a colour that's, I don't know how you say it, I don't know what the definition is. And then that's not enough, then we have to make sure there are no other valid cognitions of what's called red that contradict that definition. An easier one will be cup. So what's a cup, mummy? Well, darling, it's this flat-bottomed clay container. I can see that, okay? But I don't know what it is yet. I want to know what it does. What's its job? Well, darling, it holds my tea. That's the definition of a cup. But don't be satisfied yet. I've got to prove it's true. So, I get my tea and I pour. And if we see that it does hold my tea, we have now ticked the box. That's a cup. Because it fit its definition. But not happy yet. We have to make sure there are no other valid cognitions in the minds of others, valid cognition, and there's a way of establishing what a valid cognition is, that contradict that. So then when we discover there aren't, then we can all agree by convention, that's what it means. By convention, by agreement. We all tick the box, sign the contract, shake hands, that's a cup. That's why we don't fight about what a cup is. But if I say to Miko, I love you, and he says, I love you, we think we're agreeing. I'm sorry, he's got one definition, I've got another. That's why we have fights. So here, she sees green. So we immediately think, okay, she's got some problem here. We don't beat her up. We don't bully her into believing it's red, make her feel guilty. We see there's a problem. So we fix her problem, don't we? That means her eyes, her glasses, maybe her use of the word. Maybe she is really seeing red, but she calls it green. So we check what the problem is, and then we fix the problem. Okay? Now, I put in front of her this cup. Now, what will she see now that we have fixed the problem? Huh?
Right.
Who else has an idea? What will she see?
Green, but she'll know that everyone else thinks it's red.
No, you didn't hear me say we fixed the problem. Did you hear me say that?
Yes.
What does that mean, fix the problem?
Either we got a green cup.
No. The problem is in her eyes, not the cup. We fixed her problem, meaning? What do you think it means we fixed her problem? If her problem is her eyes, what's fixing the problem mean?
Well, depends on if you mean fixing the problem as a medical question, as fixing her,
As opposed to what else?
as opposed to fixing or having the knowledge that what she's seeing is different from...
No, you're making it far too complicated. Okay, may I suggest? Okay. Do you accept if you see green when there's red, you're making a mistake? Would you accept that conventionally? You're making it much too complicated. Do you accept that's red conventionally?
Yes.
So do you accept that someone who sees green isn't seeing it correctly? Can you accept that?
Yes.
Thank you. So now, where would the problem exist? In her eyes. Because eyes are the one, not her ears, is it? Not her fingers.
No.
Do you understand? It's her eyes, isn't it? You agree? So if we fix her eyes, we have fixed the problem. You agree?
Yes.
Thank you. So if I show her a red cup now, what will she see?
Well, if you can fix her eyes...
We just said we did.
Well, okay, then...
We
she'll
just
see
said we
red.
did. So what will she see now?
Then she'll see red.
Thank you. Anybody got any other ideas? Huh? She won't see red, believe me. And this is the point. You listen to this. She will get the shock of her life. She'll say, oh my God, it's not green. Won't she say that? Can you hear this? Why?
She has different kind of...
All her life she has seen green every time red appeared in front of her. And she's expected green. She's built up the belief it's green. She anticipates green. She will naturally get a shock when she doesn't see green. So she won't see red yet. She will see the absence of green. That's emptiness. I'm an example of an emptiness. Let me give another example. Can you hear the point yet?
Yes.
In other words, if Mikko leaves me, he's, my husband for 40 years, I come home and he's left me. He's left a note instead. I've left you for my secretary, let's say. So every day I'm getting over the grief and the loss of lost Mikko. Now I walk in my house every day. All I will see will be the absence of Mikko, won't it? You don't know of Mikko. You walk in the house, you won't notice the absence of Mikko, will you? Because you don't expect Mikko, you've never heard of Mikko. Can you hear this point? So the absence of something is very vivid for the person who thought it was there, who expects it to be there, who believes it's there, and who's frantically attached to its being there. It's a massive, very powerful experience, isn't it? Can you hear that? Can you hear that? Okay. Another example, which is even more tasty. Okay, I'll say. So what Buddha's saying is this. For eons, we have in the mind this delusion called ego grasping that totally believes in a real, independent I. Now, we don't even know what that means yet, so don't worry about that. But just imagine we have believed in a wrong I. Imagine we've believed all our lives in an I that isn't there. Imagine that, right? Okay? And then one day you finally have the realization of that. So what you're going to see, what you're going to nakedly see is the absence of that I that you always thought was there since beginningless time. So they say the realization of emptiness, the realization, the seeing, the cognition of the absence of that fantasy I you have believed in since beginningless time, that's been the basis of all happiness and all suffering, is quite a stupendous experience. In Rinpoche's teachings in the book, he talks about this. So what I'm trying to get around, to just the concept of the moment, to get your head around the idea of cognizing the absence of something. Can you get that? So a really nice example, let's say you've been saving up your euros, and you know you've saved up 10,000 euros. Let's say every day you're putting the money in the bank, you know it's there, you look at the account, you open up the internet, there's your 10,000, building up, and you've got 10,000 euros in your bank. And you know it's there, utterly, completely convinced. And you open up the bank one day, the statement, and all there is there, reality, is a zero. Now, I guarantee you will not see no dollars in your bank. You won't go, oh, there's no dollars in my bank. You will say, where's my $10,000? My euro. You understand what I'm saying? You will see the vividest, fattest, biggest phenomenon called absence of 10,000 euros. Can you hear me here?
Yes.
If I don't know what's in your bank and you ask me to read it out, oh, there's nothing in your bank, Robina. I won't see an absence of 10,000 euros because I never expected it. Can you hear this? So so she sees red appears in front of her, but she gets the shock of her life and says, oh my God, it's not green. She'll eventually see the red. Great. But the thing she sees first is the absence of the fantasy that never existed there. So this is the point I'm getting at here also is this, that emptiness has got nothing to do with nothingness. The zero in the bank is like you've chucked out the 10,000 euros and now there's nothing there and that's the meaning of emptiness. No. The seeing of the emptiness of 10,000 euros is a very big fat thing to see, isn't it? It's a big, huge thing to notice. So to see the absence of this fantasy I is the most stupendous, powerful experience. It's not, oh well, there's no I. Like chuck out all the bits and there's nothing left. It's got nothing to do with nihilism. And this is where the biggest mistake we make, and we'll talk more about this. Are you hearing me a little bit? So the other piece here, just here, is why, I mean, we'd say, yeah, you're right, it's not green. Yeah, you're right, there's no money in the bank, or there's no 10,000 euros. But when you study Buddhist philosophy, this is very helpful. Okay, Buddha's saying, remember? Buddha's saying that our mind has the capacity to cognize that which exists without mistake. Finally, that's the wisdom we've all got to achieve. Of course, this is a maniac idea in the culture, in the world, the view of the mind. It's madness. It's like you try to add up every single bit of knowledge and you think that's what you're supposed to be saying. That's not the point for the Buddha. Cognizing that which exists doesn't mean having every bit of knowledge in your head, like all the maths and all the music, not like that. It's this whole idea of having removed from our mind these neuroses that project lies onto what does exist. When you remove those lies, those veils from your eyes, the world is existing as it is, cups and toilets and goods and bads. But now it's abstract to us, but we see them without embellishment. We see them as they are. Words that are abstract to us. So the Buddha is saying the mind has the capacity to cognize that which exists. Now, when you study Buddhist philosophy, one of the first things you learn in the kind of structure of the universe, the worldview, Buddha's model of the universe, there are several synonyms for that which exists. The word object, it doesn't refer to a physical thing, an object of knowledge, an object that something can be cognized by the mind. The mind is called subject and it always has an object. So things that exist are objects of mind. Another term is phenomenon. Another term is established base. Another term is existent. 4 synonyms. There are more, I think. I can't remember. For that which exists. And this is a crucial thing to understand because Buddha's saying our job being a Buddhist is to remove from the mind the lies so that we can now cognize that which exists, which happens to be the method to get happy. Add compassion to it and you become a Buddha. So therefore, we can say everything that exists in the universe is necessarily that which can be cognized by the mind. So that which exists is that which can be cognized by mind. So therefore, if you think of everything as a phenomenon, then if we take this cup, would you agree cup is a phenomenon? Cup exists, yeah? Cup can be cognized by our mind, yeah? Handle is a phenomenon. It's an existent, yeah? Conventional. It can be cognized by mind. Red is a phenomenon. It can be cognized by mind, right? Absence of green can be cognized by our mind, can't it, on this cup? It's abstract. A dog won't cognize it. But we can deduce because it's red, it's not green. So turn not green into a noun. A nounal phrase. It's absence of green, isn't it? It's a very vivid phenomenon that does exist. Absence of green does exist on this cup. You accept? It is abstract, but it's very, very necessary to understand this use of the words. Can you hear it? But of course, it's not just being clever. Like there's also an absence of an elephant on this cup. Who cares? The only reason to point out an absence of something is the absence of something you thought was there that never has been there. This is a crucial point. Not just being clever here. Are you understanding my point? Mm-hmm. If you thought there were 10,000 euros and there aren't, you're in big trouble if you think they're there. So we have thought there's an I in here that Buddha says isn't, and we're going to go to that in a minute. That's his point. We believed in it since beginningless time. A completely wrong view, a mistake, a lie. The I that this ego grasping thinks is there literally isn't and never could be. 10,000 euros could exist. Green could exist. But an inherent I could never exist. So this absence, when we see it, is a much more dramatic one. So what I'm getting around first here is the use of the concept of the absence of something. This is huge to get your head around. Can you hear my point a bit now? Now we have to investigate what it is that doesn't exist when it comes to the I. That's another discussion. So in other words, what we're trying to do here is, the other point, the mind will always cognize something. So not just there, it isn't green. Turn isn't green into a phenomenon. It's called absence of green. Turn there's not, there isn't 10,000 euros. Turn it into a noun. The absence of 10,000 euros. Can you hear my point? It's a crucial point to get. But, they don't spell it out like this when you study. You kind of just deduce it as you go along, or not. And if you don't, you get confused. Because then as soon as we hear the concept of emptiness, we immediately think of nothingness. Just spontaneously our mind goes to that. So this is the point about the two truths. It's so, so tasty. That conventional truth, that you name something, define it, you check that it fits the definition, you check there's no other valid cognition that contradicts it, and then we all sign off on it. And that's how come we can communicate. So how come you understanding any of the words I'm saying here is if we have got the right definition. But if you've got one definition of some of my words, then you're not going to hear me properly. And that's natural, because I'm using Buddhist definitions here. And if you're using your definition when I say attachment, you're going to hear it very, very, very differently. And I can't help that. Do you see what I'm saying? In other words, you know yourself, I'm not very good at computers, I know a few things, but as soon as an IT guy starts talking about, I get confused, server, this one, that one, W something, because I don't know the definition, so I get confused. But if you learn the definitions, you won't get confused, Like when you speak Finnish to me, I'm lost. So I don't know any of those phrases. So it's so important, if you want to understand Buddha, it's like maths, you better learn the definitions, please. Learn exactly what he's saying, what is attachment. Don't think you know because you know the word. You've got your view. You're allowed to have your view, but not Buddha's. Emptiness, we put our own trips on it, It's ridiculous. It's such a specific definition. And if we want to communicate, like in any system we learn, we know that. If you're learning geometry, you learn that you have a flat table. And then you hear about people living in a flat. If you stick to your stubborn definition of flat, you'll be in big trouble. Then you play B flat in music, you're even more confused. So we've got to learn the definitions. It's so important. Then you can communicate. Then you have something to think about. Then you can realise it, So, okay, the two truths. Conventional truth. Individual separate phenomena. Their name, their definition. We agree upon it. Now we can begin the discussion of how it exists. What is its reality? Of course, this is Buddha's take on things, The world doesn't talk like this. Well, it does in a different way. It does, of course. Now you've got ultimate. Or finally. The shorthand for conventional is dependent arising. That everything that does exist conventionally, that can be established conventionally, necessarily exists in dependence upon many, many factors. So it can be expressed here in terms of 3 levels of dependent arising. The very first one, already so tasty, and enough to actually realise emptiness if we got it, is that, for example, the thing we've established as a cup, this flat-bottomed clay container that holds your drink, is the culmination of many, many, many causes and conditions. So I remember when I studied with my philosophy teacher, Geshe Tekchok, in England, when I first started studying, he used the example of the phenomenon called ROBINA. He said, it can be said that everything in the universe, up to the first moment of ROBINA, is validly a cause and a condition for the existence of ROBINA. It sounds cosmic, but once we start to follow this through, you can see it's a logical deduction. So start with the cup. Anything, any phenomenon that exists. So once you start, because of cause and effect, you can't ever get back. We want to get back to a first moment, you see. Desperately, frantically, we think there has to be a first moment of something. Buddha says it's how irrational. What do you want a first moment for? So the cup, first of all, you can take any angle you like, you know. The person who created the cup. Miko, let's say, created the cup. Well, Miko is one of the crucial causes of this cup, we can see that. Well, Miko, his very existence depends upon a decent mother. And if there's no mother of Miko, there can't be a Miko. And if there's no Miko, there can't be this cup created by Miko. And then you go back to beginningless mothers, you're never going to get back to the first mother. That's just one track of the causes. Then everywhere you go, the paint, the clay, the potter, the piece of paper he used to write the drawing down to give to the pottery so they could make his cup. The paper came from trees, someone chopped the tree down. Everywhere you go, you get going back causes. Everything you posit has previous causes. Everything you posit has previous causes. And all of these validly come down to being causes and conditions for the existence of this cup. Everything in the universe up to the first moment of this cup. You can hear it logically. So we go, oh yeah, who cares? Big deal, how exciting. What's that got to do with anything, you know? Well, the point of dependent arising is, as Lama Yeshe puts it, and there's a teaching in there about this, must be in your second volume, I think, in this unique presentation of teachings, unique to Finland. There's a teaching in there on dependent arising. As Lama Yeshe says, paraphrasing Tsongkhapa, that dependent arising is the king of logics to prove emptiness. So the real power of the two truths, conventional truth, there is a cup that does exist in dependence upon, for example, many, many, many causes and conditions. The more one thinks of that, it's not just meant to make you feel all intelligent, but what it's meant to do, when we think of it properly, meditate on it, analyse it, what it does is break down the instinctive process of seeing this cup as solid, independent, real, uncaused, existing out there from its own side. And so the more we break it down into its component causes, the more you're going to discover there is no cup from its own side, which is emptiness. So in other words, dependent arising, in this even example of the first level, the more you analyse how the cup is a product of causes and conditions, that there's no cup among those causes and conditions, the more it brings you to the conclusion, which is the ultimate truth, there is therefore no cup from its own side. Or the cup is empty of existing inherently. The cup is empty of existing independently of causes and conditions. So we don't think we think there is an independent cup there, but it does appear to us this way. It's instinctive that we think of it this way, and Buddha says we don't notice it because it's so primordial. So by thinking about how its causes and conditions gets us to see how we are making that mistake. And the more we think about dependent arising, in terms of even the first one, causes and conditions, it loosens the grip of grasping at an inherent cup. So a really tasty example is when it comes to the phenomenon called I. So the way we instinctively feel about our I, if you look at the feeling of I, Lama Yeshe would refer to it as the self-pity me, which sounds kind of cruel. But it's true. I is the central player in all our heads, isn't it? The thought of I is the central player. And everything is seen in reference to this I. So when there's a very strong ego grasping, and then a very strong attachment to get what that I wants, and then a strong offended and aversion when it doesn't, and then strong pride when this happens, and aggression when that happens, and jealousy when this happens, they're all coming down to the root assumption of the independent I in the first place. So the more we break down that I, and so the feeling about I, that was the analysis of it. The feeling about I is that I'm an innocent victim, that I didn't ask to get born, that things happen unfairly to me, that how dare they do that to me? Why can't I have this? We believe in these assumptions because they're so ingrained in us. We don't question them like we were saying before. So the feeling of I is like this big fat lump of me produced by someone else and plonked on this earth, living in fear of the bad things and hope for the good things, crossing our fingers and hope that things work out okay, not feeling at all like I'm a central player. like feeling like we feel like things are done to us, either fairly or unfairly. We don't really think we're in charge of the process. Our philosophies tell us someone else put me here. You know, they're responsible, which is why we blame our parents. It's very instinctive in us to feel like this innocent victim, isn't it? Look at all the energy of when we start to analyse attachment and anger and jealousy and pride. They're all the voices of an innocent victim. And they're all at this level of deep assumption, like I'm saying. So when you start to use the law of cause and effect, like we did for the cup, but in relation to I, that's karma. So the feeling, it's like it's hilarious to us to say that I created me. It's hilarious for us to think that I've got a lousy mother because I must have harmed her in the past. I mean, the feeling we have is, how dare my mother be less than perfect? We spend the rest of our lives indignant that our mother dared to have me and not be perfect. This is the pain of so many people's lives. It's an assumption that we totally believe in. Whereas Buddha says, excuse me, Robina, you get the mother you deserve. You ran like a maniac to that womb. She was lying in there with your father, minding her own business, and you come along. Don't blame your mother. You put yourself there. This is such a powerful concept. Straight away, it makes us accountable and reasonable. Well, this is applying karma as a view, not the view of materialist view, self-existent, didn't get asked to get born, parents' fault, God's fault, somebody else's fault. Can you hear what I'm saying, people? So thinking about karma, just the philosophy of karma, that puts me, my continuity of mind, me in the position of having created my conditions at the moment. That's kind of powerful. So that breaks down the self-pity me, because I'm accountable, which loosens the grip of ego grasping and then leads you to the conclusion, well, therefore, there is no I from its own side. How can there be? It's just causes and conditions. So the two truths are related to each other. So the dependent arising, and I'm going to use the first example, we're going to go to the second one in a minute, after tea break. What time are we finishing?
5 o'clock.
Oh, it's time for a tea break. Another tea break. Do you want a tea break?
Yes.
Huh? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, have a tea break. And I'll have a voice break. Then we'll carry on and we'll go to the second dependent arising, which is even more tasty.